Hi, this is the two worst inseparable best friends. My name is Abe.
I'm Nick.
And we're hosts of this podcast. This episode, we're talking about racism and classism in sports, specifically looking at club sports versus team and contact sports. All right, let's start into it. This is our first episode, so we're going to start with just a little bit breaking down what we're talking about in this podcast overall. Well, we're trying to break down the different ways in which class and race have a lot of interplay in the U.S. And affect each other. As a lot of researchers pointed out, such as Jessica Page in her paper points out that African Americans have been systematically less able to succeed in economic situations. Like a child of a middle class African American family will be a lot less likely to maintain that status as middle class than a white child of a middle class family. There's also things like the fact that the United States is ranked fairly low on economic mobility nationwide or internationally. We don't have a lot of people going from lower class to middle class or middle class to upper class. And people tend to move downward in the class structure rather than upward. And since that hasn't really changed since the ending of slavery, black people in America have not had a lot of chance to move upward class-wise. And along with that, we have researchers such as Thomas Clevens discussing exactly what we're talking about here, how a racist society is intrinsically classist because racism is used to perpetuate classist ideas. This is also where we're going to introduce kind of the structure of this podcast. This is a lot of me explaining things. But what are your thoughts on the matter, Nick? As someone coming from the perspective of not having researched this for the past 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of obviously racism in America and in the US, but I think there's a lot of racism also rooted in sports because a lot of the times what people consider the most important players in on sports teams are often not the ones that are highlighted or recognized or even paid the most fairly. I think there's a lot of racism in that, and especially when you bring in financial factors in that as well. And it shows that even some of the most valued players or those who are at the top of their game, even more so than their white counterparts, are still kind of being bogged down by society and by the racism built into those institutions. So I'm interested to see what points you bring up with that.
Perfect. That transitions us really nicely into our first topic, which is talking about how historically quite a few sports, including some of the sports that are now predominantly played professionally by black players, have a long history of racism culturally built into the sport. First example, Denise Harvey in her article detailed how golf specifically has a really racist and classist history with their explicit rules. For the longest time, specific golf clubs didn't allow any black players. Every player had to be white and every caddy had to be black. When that rule was questioned, they changed it to something still explicitly racist, but also explicitly classist in nature, being that every player couldn't come from being a caddy. There were no caddy-turned players. So people who had been playing the sport, black people, usually got introduced as caddies. Now they couldn't transition to be professional players. It also meant that people who got into the sport through the economically viable way, trying to work into it, couldn't transition to be players. This also involves the NFL. What is your knowledge with the NFL's history of racism?
Not a lot. Really, truly not a lot.
Well, the best example we have is very recent history. As of 2021 was when the NFL officially ended their race norming in their concussion settlements, which resulted in lower settlements for black players who got concussions because the race norming had black players starting from a lower standard of intelligence, so they had less to lose in those concussion testings. But yeah, this plays to what you were talking about of like that history of racism.
Yeah, I think it's something that's like built intrinsically into like the systems of America, obviously from like the past and like slavery and just like actively keeping anyone who is not white at like a certain barrier, like below a certain barrier of success. And so I think we really see kind of the like ripple effects of that throughout like the rest of our society, even places that you might not expect it, like sports, in kind of like shady ways and practices of that, where it's maybe not the most outright thing, but it is still in the system and still affecting a lot of these individuals at large.
Yeah, and it plays into things such as like IQ testing, which we won't talk a lot about today, but has a long history of racism and specifically classism in the way that people thought that black people and poor people were intrinsically less intelligent because of genetics.
Yeah, when in fact it's actually just the repercussions of how our society is built up and not having the chance to like learn and not having the even like proper access to like childhood development a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
Which is just setting up people for failure and is continuing the perpetual cycle.
Yeah, which it plays into how like being black, while you aren't intrinsically worse, it might in America make you intrinsically more likely to be poor.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that makes you intrinsically worse. It makes you worse off because of the system that you're in, and that's not anyone's fault except for the people who set it up.
Absolutely. And that goes right into our like discussion about the structure of what's going on. 'Cause like there are a lot of historical racist practices in sports, and we can talk about more of that later, but also there's a lot of like just basic things about how sports are played that makes some of them a lot less accessible to someone coming from a lower economic status. Stuff like there's a really clear correlation between racial distributions in certain sports and the amount of the cost of equipment per player. This plays into something like basketball, a team sport where theoretically all you need to play it is 2 hoops or even just 1 and 1 ball for both teams. Which has, let me pull up the numbers because we have them here. The NBA has a 74% of their players are black, or the WNBA. 67% of their players are black, as opposed to something like golf, where every player has to have multiple clubs, has to have access to a very large golf course. There's a lot of economic barriers that come into that, and that's how you have, let me pull up, 72% of professional golfers in America are white. It's nearly directly opposite statistics versus basketball. And it's not just about the economic needs of playing a sport like that, but it's also partially about that. I know that we're both coming from less advantaged backgrounds. Did you ever consider playing golf?
No, not once. Cannot say I once considered golf.
And maybe neither of us really liked golf, but it was also, I think partially, I think we can both speak to this, of like, golf didn't seem like something you could ever just pick up.
No, it was never something you could just pick up. It was always something where like you had to know a person or who'd like be able to like get you an into a golf course, or you would have to pay out of pocket to be able to golf on that golf course, plus like renting equipment. And like if you have never played golf before, you kind of like need a person to teach you how to play golf. So it really requires like in like every way, either like financially or just like quote knowing a guy. So yeah, it was never something that's just like, oh, I'm gonna pick up golf this summer actually with the limitless amount of money and time that I have, obviously. No, It was never I think, anything that a lot of people considered.
Yeah. And I think also part of that is that none of our parents played golf.
Yeah.
And so it's that same thing where if there is low economic mobility, generally you'll play the sports that your parents played, and your parents definitely didn't have access to golf. And so you're probably also not going to. But my dad spent his 20s playing basketball, and I know in elementary school even, there was just a basketball court, and we could just pick up the basketballs and play it. And I'm not an avid basketball player.
No, I'm not either.
But I've played it.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, like, you play in, like, gym class and at recess or, like, at a friend's house or in the park, because it is something that is very accessible, and it is something that you can learn, like, on your feet. Even if you don't necessarily know how to play it, it's intuitive enough where you can, like, pick it up in some capacity.
Mm. Which is kind of getting to the point of all of this, which is, like, access and having also a culture around access to any sport is a huge thing. Because theoretically, maybe we would have gotten into golfing if there was a, like, golf field trip day where all of our classes went out to a golf course, we all borrowed some equipment, and we played around with golf. That, like, simple access in early childhood could have changed a lot. I also know that in my research, I found that not only was there a significant impact to participation in sports, but there's also a really large impact to the success in sports that people have. Often in America, there's a, like, really strong belief in a meritocracy, even when there isn't one. A lot of people believe America as a whole is a meritocracy. There's a lot of evidence showing that low social mobility shows that not really is it a meritocracy. But beyond that, people really truly believe that sports is a meritocracy. All you have to do is be high performing, work hard, train, and you'll succeed, and you'll be able to move up in the world through succeeding at sports. But there's a lot of evidence, specifically through research of high school sports success, that there isn't that moving up. That there isn't that meritocracy in sports. Research done by Goldsmith and Abel pointed out that high school sports teams' success, the number of wins they had in comparison to other teams, was directly correlated to economic status of the school. They found that schools that were primarily, or at least half, made up of working-class families rather than middle-class families were significantly lower in win rates as opposed to high schools that had majority middle-class families. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I've seen like real life examples of this, like when we were in high school, and high school went to was very much full of it was kind of a mix of people. There was a lot of, like, upper middle class kids who went to that high school, and I think it was like my senior year, we played some other school, and we, like, absolutely wiped them, and it was a whole thing where everyone was like, oh my god, like, was such an easy game. We won, like, by the first quarter. Like, it was such an easy match. And one of my teachers, it was, like, first period, we're all sitting down, everyone's talking about it, and he was like, I just want to make a point of that school was predominantly a bunch of, like, boys of color coming in to play football for the love of the game, and they come from very low income, like, school and, like, town, and they were showing up and putting their best forward, and they don't have the opportunities that everyone else does, and they still played a really good game. It was just they didn't have the access to all of the things that we had as a higher funded school, one of the better funded schools in the area, which isn't saying much, but still, they didn't have as much opportunity, but they were still showing up for the love of the game. And I think that kind of shows that if you are better funded and you are higher up in the, like, economic, what do you call it, economic, like, pyramid or economic standing, you do have a higher likelihood for success because you're already starting off higher than anyone below you. in terms of like accessibility and funding and everything. So I think that definitely does play a really big role in things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, I guess just like digging further into how like financial standing affects sports is if, like, say someone in high school wants to go professional, there's so many costs associated with even trying out for a team where it's like, yeah, you're not going to become an athlete most of the time unless you get a crazy scholarship to go to a school that really wants you, or if you already have a higher economic standing or, higher like social standing in like middle class or upper class or anything like that. Because sometimes you don't get paid for it, or you don't get paid that much for it, especially when we talk about like college, like football and stuff like that, or like college basketball.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of like intersectionality in that too, of like if you're a woman versus a man and versus like the college that you end up going to. I think there's just a lot of factors that you have to take into account when you look at being able to move up from like lower middle class to middle class, to even like upper middle class, things like that, where it's not just accessibility, it is so many other factors in that.
Yeah. I mean, as like Goldsmith and Abel pointed out, it's things like being able to, parents being able to take your kids to after school practices,
Exactly.
or hire a private coach for their kids, or the income, the property taxes of a neighborhood paying the salary of a coach. Some high schools are able to like look for career football coaches who have been doing it for years and years and who know how to coach a football team in a way that will have college like scouts coming to games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also we talked earlier about like the like accessibility of like sports from like a young age, and things with like basketball and football, it's easy because you need a limited amount of equipment, but also the idea of like, oh, you just have to be good at a sport and practice and you'll be able to succeed, gets into the topic of conversation of like, well, yes, that's true, but also you need someone there to like point out how you can get better. Mm-hmm. You don't really get better at things without like critiques and without like someone kind of helping you along the way. And I think that also it really ties into like you have to have accessibility to that. You have to have someone like, like a professional like coach or something to tell you how to be better, versus just like, oh, you're born with it, you're gonna work hard, you're gonna do all the great things. Like, you really have to have that privilege of having accessibility to all of those things. That's really not realistic for a lot of individuals. So I think that plays a really big part in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I may not know sports terms, but no one was really born throwing perfect spirals or shooting all net.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you.
I want to say thank you.
We want to say thank you to you.
Thank you so much to you, the listener who's
for
listening.
Because
to us.
listening is what makes this happening. This wouldn't happen without you.
You make it work by listening to us.
Mm-hmm. This whole thing wouldn't exist without you.
Because we are just talking to each other, but you're listening.
And you make that happen because podcasts need a listener.
We need listeners, and that's you. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for sticking with us. So I'm going to bring this back around to one of my favorite topics, and it's awful, but it's policy. Talking about how we've talked about a lot of things like cultural issues, some structural issues, some other things. But at the end of the day, I want to bring this back around to the fact that while there are strong cultural issues associated with this, a strong history of racism in these institutions, really what is keeping poor and black people out of these sports is that culture. But that culture is embedded by really strong structural problems that can be solved. there are things to do that can help abate these strong issues, such as what we talked about previously, having schools step in, be part of the solution, provide access to these previously inaccessible things, but also having more community-centered spaces for these things. A community center, like a park that provides some golfing, or a park that has tennis courts, something that's free to access for everyone in the community, completely changes people's ability to participate in these sports.
Yeah, I think that's the policy of it is a really big part, because it also becomes a point of, yes, these are like intrinsically like in the like structure of these organizations, because that's how our society's built up. But then it becomes a point of, well, how much are we willing to like strive for that change, and how much are people willing to do to make that change happen? I think it's a big issue that we see in America as a whole with kind of everything of it. We see, systemic issues and want a change to happen, but the issue is getting people to act on that and kind of getting people to care enough about that, and not just believing that it'll all work itself out in the end, because we all believe in equality and equal freedom and opportunity, but that's not the case. And it's, I think, really easy to just let people fall through the cracks instead of like actually fighting for that change and striving for that change, because it also is back around to money and time, and even if it's like a nonprofit, you have to have people who are able to afford to work for that nonprofit. And you have to be able to staff it and fund it, even if it's like a community program. So I think that is another layer of an issue with policy of, you have to change the policy, which takes time, money, and effort, and how willing are people to do that is one of the biggest issues that I think we run into kind of as a society with those sorts of things. Because in a perfect world, we would all just be like, yeah, no, this is awful and we should definitely change it, and it would be a change overnight. But unfortunately, not really how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also ties back into the idea of a meritocracy, because America isn't a meritocracy, but that doesn't mean we can't strive for that sort of goal. And like you were saying, with the slow policy change, those changes can lead to that structural inequality that keeps people in the socioeconomic place they are in society. Those changes over time, especially if people do care and people do understand the systems, can change that system to be more meritocracy based, to have greater access for lower income groups of all races to have access to these resources that may lead to them raising their socioeconomic status, or reinvesting back into the community to generally raise the quality of life for lower income communities.
I think a lot of it really just, I guess you're saying, kind of boils down to just people caring enough. And I think that's unfortunately the issue we run into of just not, I feel like, within our society, just people don't care as much, or you can't get people to care about those kinds of things, because it's always oh, not my problem. That's someone else's problem. Or, well, I don't see how this is going to benefit me. And it's, I think, that issue of just not caring to take the steps towards change, because usually if a few people start doing it, then other people will also be like, hey, yeah, no, I agree with that, let's see that change happen, and it'll snowball enough to see actual change. But the issue is getting those first few kind of people starting the ball rolling, and kind of making not a ruckus, but making noise about it and being this is something we need to change, because I think people don't take issues seriously until it becomes a problem for them, and that's kind of sad.
Definitely. And I think definitely into that, people don't care. They also, a lot of people don't know what to do.
Exactly, yeah. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And instead of looking out to other people, or like looking around and being like, okay, I don't know what to do. Is there someone who might? Can I like talk to people in my community, like people around me? Can I talk to people who might be more educated on this? Can I figure it out? They just kind of want it like handed to them and aren't willing to like go out from themselves and like talk and educate themselves and like learn and build community. And it just kind of instead I think it's pushed under the rug a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving away from like an academic point of view, I think this is a lot of where we get terms like boycott fatigue, where people are trying, but they don't really see that change happening. They don't see what's going on. And so they're feeling really tired of being like, oh, I need to care, but what am I doing?
Exactly.
And I think having a greater culture around that, like, help around being part of that change and seeing more like concrete change really helps mitigate that sort of fatigue people have.
And I think part of the issue too is that we have really become such an individualistic society over the past, I want to say like few decades, probably even more than that, where we really don't come together as a community on like a large scale that much like we do in, certain situations. Like you see like large protests, but largely like I've seen online in the past like few years, just kind of moving away from this topic a little bit, but still tangentially related, online, where people will be like, okay, we're gonna do this boycott for this store or this, or like it's gonna be a no buy day kind of thing, but there's no community support with it.
Yeah.
And it's just like really poor planning. So there is the like fatigue of that, where it's like, okay, well, we're trying to like plan this, but no one is planning it in a meaningful way or with any sort of community support to where like it will be successful. And I think some fatigue can come from that too, of just like, we're so individualistic that we have it feels like there are miles and miles between like the people you're trying to do this like cause with, and it seems like a unbridgeable gap. And I think that's the issue, where it's like, okay, well, I'm not even going to try because it seems like nothing in the past has worked. And I think that's also part of our issue of like having meaningful change is it's the fatigue of, I feel like nothing's working kind of thing.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And I think that playing off of my personal experience in like local nonprofits, I think a lot of this is partially the internet as a medium for change, because I think the internet is fantastic. It's a wonderful way to raise awareness, to reach audiences that previously you could not reach before. But also, most change that's actually gonna affect people personally happens locally. And the internet provides a space for people to distance themselves from issues where they want to address issues that are happening to other people, because that feels easier, I think, to process emotionally. But what you get when you work locally is you're able to see change really like tangibly. And so I think that's part of what I like really want to promote with like information like this, is that working locally with like local community centers, like really building the spaces around you, are the best way to achieve this change, the change you want to see, because you can also spread from there using the internet.
Exactly. I think people don't realize is that a lot of like the large scale like systemic changes that we want to see, you have to start at a local level. So like with this, you have to start with building community, getting like kids more involved, getting support for like high schoolers, maybe you want to do it professionally, and you have to really like set up that foundation at a large scale, and like across, for example, like across the country, you have to make sure that that is happening in as many places as possible, and then you can go after the systemic change that you want to see in sports of getting lower economic standing people like into sports and having the funds to be able to live their dream of doing that, and then also getting financial compensation that is fair to them as a member of that team, and kind of like getting rid of that sort of gap that we see in like pay and in the way that people are treated in that sense. So I feel like people don't realize that you have to start at that local level to give these like kids a fighting chance in that too. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings a really nice conclusion to what we talked about here. I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to thank you again, Nick, for letting me rant at you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, beautiful.
I'm gonna say, because I was thinking about like the romanticization. You know what I'm trying to say?